Hi, my name is Melissa Wilson, and I'm going to give a presentation today on ELL evaluations and considerations. The first thing I want to talk a little bit is about my background. I was actually pretty excited about this chapter because this year I've got to dive into a little bit of this at work. I started as a sped para for our school for a child with autism, and I worked half a day with him and then half a day in the speech and language department as a para, and I learned quite a lot as I worked as a para in speech and language. But in the first 2 years, I didn't get a lot of experience with our ELL students because it was primarily handled by our speech and language pathologist there that we had on staff. Something we did new this year, we had someone hired to be our speech path teacher, but she quit about a week before school started. So they searched for a new path, was not able to find one. So they started a new model at our school called teletherapy. And so they asked me to coordinate everything on site, and then a speech path would come up on the TV and provide services with me alongside the student. This was brand new for me, but an exciting opportunity to learn something new. And I did everything in house. I helped with the IEPs, helped hold the meetings. I zoomed in the speech path. I was able to have hands on experience with the speech path when she did her screens and her full evaluations. I was able to help sit in with students, ELL students in the classroom. So I did have a lot of cool experience this year. And so I was excited to dive a little bit more into that with this new chapter. And so the first thing I want to talk about is dialects and assessments. In this area, I've got to see this happen. It's not something I thought a lot about until I sat through some observations and some assessments with our speech path. And it's something she always told me. And it wasn't just for our English language learners, but also cultural differences because she was from the city and she was coming in and doing evaluations of our students who are very rural. And she was seeing some things that were actually pretty interesting. And in one of her evaluations, she had an assessment that had a little white picket fence around this house. And every student she did an evaluation on did not know vocabulary wise that that was a fence. Now, if she showed them barbed wire fence, then they would say, "Oh yeah, well that's fence." Because our kids who are very rural that don't live in town, they have not had the experience to know that or seeing that that little white picket fence around a house is an actual fence, because our kids are very rural. And so she would tell me, she's like, these are things you have to consider, culturally in your area. This is something that your students would know. And you always have to take that into consideration. And something else I saw that she did, we had a student that was referred to us that had receiving ESL services for 3 years, I believe. And the first thing that the path did, she's like, I'm going to reach out to the family because if we have a kiddo who has some language delays, they're going to be across the board. They're going to be in the native language, and they're going to be in English as well. And so, and I talked to the sister who's a high school student that acts as a family's interpreter, and she had told me yes that she had seen it with him, and the mom had seen it as well. And so I thought that was very interesting. It's not something that I had really thought of before. And so you have to make sure, that you think of those kinds, and you get a thorough interview with the family to find out, if they're seeing any delays so that the full picture of what's going on. And so the gold standard, of course, when it comes to testing would be to test the student in both the native language and the English language so that you have a side-by-side complete view of what's going on with the student. And so, but a lot of schools, unfortunately, don't have that. And so we have to look outside the box, try to find ways to get the whole picture of what's going on with our students. And it's also important to make sure that the testing that we do decide to use is testing the skills of the student, that it's testing their comprehension, their reading, their math skills, and things like that. And it's not testing their ability to read English. And so that's something that I think we take for granted as if English is our primary language and we're testing, that it's not something we think of. But if you're an English language learner, then that's going to be something that is difficult for you because if you can't understand the question, then you can't answer it because you don't understand the language. And so that's something that's important. Interventions. When we go through and talk about interventions, the main thing that I've learned about interventions through this chapter is that we're going to use a lot of the same interventions that we would use for kids who are not English language learners, but we're going to mix it in with a native language and a second language. And so in a way that native language will act as an aid. And so we're going to use visuals, we're going to use repetition. The repetition, of course, needs to be at least 12 exposures to a new word before they're going to know it. You're going to have to check background language. You're going to have to see, does this student know the vocabulary that I'm fixing to use? I can't assume that they're going to know what these words mean. So you need to do, a check. And if they do not know those words, you're going to have to use some scaffolding. And so that's something that you have to consider as well. And then when I say use that native language as an aid, they still need to know those skills that are in the classroom, but you're going to use that native language alongside to aid in that, and so that you can teach them those new skills, but in the native language, and then they'll cross over. And so you also need to look at using explicit instruction to teach those new sounds and words, and also look for any connections between the two languages, because a lot of languages have some similarities, and you can use those similarities to really benefit you. Now, when it comes to over and under assessment, I've seen our school both over and under assess students. When it comes to the little one that we just saw, he's been an ELL student, like I said, for 3 or 4 years, and everything was always assumed that, oh, well, it's just because he's an English language learner. Oh, it's because that's why, and that necessarily wasn't the case. So this kiddo went without interventions for a while, and because it was assumed that. And so we have to make sure that that's not happening. And what also tends to happen is internal policies. A lot of under-evaluated kids is due to internal policies. Some schools say, a kiddo has to be an English language learner for 2 years or 3 years or whatever before we're going to consider that a evaluation for a possible learning disability. And so those tend to really hamper our efforts in getting early intervention for a lot of our students. And a lot of people have a misunderstanding, including myself, until this chapter, that you cannot serve an EL student, ELL services and SPED services at the same time, but you can. And so I think that's something that most people don't realize. And I don't know if that's something that maybe needs to be covered during pre-service and something like that. I'm not sure, but that is definitely something that's going on. And a lot of people, I think, could really benefit from having ELL content taught over in-service, because I've been in 3 in-services and I've never had training on that, and I've never had, like I said, pre-service or in-service, either one on that. Now, over-identification. Over-identification would be someone automatically thinking, oh, well, this is a disability, and them not considering that this could be an ELL. And so you have to look at that. But I've seen that happen a little bit, but unfortunately, most of what I've seen in my district has been under. Something else in over is, like I talked about before, on considering assessments. On over identifying, it's that most assessment tools that we have are not appropriate to use for our students who are English language learners, because it's going to test their English language knowledge and not their content. And so the test is automatically biased and is not going to do any good. And so I think that it's going to be difficult to find the right tool, because most of us don't have an appropriate tool. And if there is an appropriate tool, we don't have anybody trained to do it, And then another reason we have students who come in and they're over-identified is we have students that might come, from another country or from outside, and they come to us, and they're coming to us already a little bit behind because it's their first time with us and their first exposure, to English language. So a lot of times they're automatically dumped into SPED and hoping that SPED can use that one-on-one instruction and get them caught up, when that's not the purpose of SPED. They need ELL support, not SPED support. And so I think that's another reason why we get a lot of the over. I have a guy, 2 kiddos I've had primarily this year have been totally different. I've got one that came in that was identified that he's super quiet, and he says, I don't know a lot. And then I have another one who is from the Hmong culture, and this is actually very interesting, and I've never heard of this happening before. But this kiddo he started this in third grade, and we put him in third grade when we moved here from Colorado, and then moved him back to second grade. But his family is Hmong, but he was not spoke to in the home. And he wasn't spoke to in the home because his family spoke Hmong, but they didn't want him to speak Hmong. They wanted him to speak English so badly that they didn't want anyone to speak anything to him except for English. But the problem was when he was little, that meant nobody spoke to him. And so this kiddo has severe delays in both English and in his own culture. And not to mention he lacks connection with people. And it's probably one of the saddest cases that I've ever known. And I imagine these parents were trying to give this kiddo the best advantages they could. Their heart was in the right place. They didn't realize, what the implications would be when you don't speak to your child. This child isn't exposed to language, and no one. It's really, really sad. But this kiddo, super resilient, and he talks so much. He has so much to say, but he has language delays, and he also has a lot of artic delays. But he's a joy, and I love him, and he has so much to say. But overall, I love the chapter. It helped me dive more into what I've experienced this year that I didn't know a lot about, but I'm starting to learn. But I have a deeper understanding after this chapter. Thank you.